Thanks, Michelle. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. We do have a couple of small revisions to the agenda. I just want to call your attention to. We have a small housekeeping measure with respect to the support for the federal earmarks on the light posts that was sent to the Senate. We've been requested to submit a similar or exactly the same letter to the other chamber, to the House. So we're going to address that probably right after general announcements. And I think that was the only change. Is that correct, Michelle?
Yes.
And we do have some folks here for public comment. So Linda and Nathan, please state your name. You do have 2 minutes for public comment. And like I said, we may not be able to answer specific questions, but we can definitely direct it to the correct people. We have Director Long here, as well as Deputy Director Lockman and members of the senior staff available to ensure that we can get you an answer. So,
okay. So I'm Nathan Fry. I'm a resident of 2 different locations in Portland, in Sunnyside and on Mount Tabor. This is my wife, Linda Walker. We're here because of the light removal and lamp removal from the parks. And I can find no information whatsoever on the specific light posts that are being removed and how they know which ones are anchored and which ones are not anchored. So that's why I'm here, because it's not very clear to me, because I've actually looked at the photographs of the failure with the hammock. And we've been blessed by a broken lamp for 2 years now near our house on the north side of Mount Tabor that was hit by a truck. And the difference is dramatic. The base of the one hit by the truck did not move at all. I mean, it didn't come disconnected from the footing, where the hammock broke off the entire light post from the footing. When that clearly shows there's no anchor, but it appears that from the spray painting done on our street, that they're planning on removing the light post from our street, but it appears from the broken one that the anchor is perfectly intact. So I wanted to know why certain ones, how they figured out which ones were anchored and which ones were not.
Mr. Fry, can you just clarify, you said from your street?
Yeah,
So.
the park, we have a house at the back of our house faces the park, and the street is right there. It'd be Taylor Street.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Yeah. We're actually on Yam Hill, our house faces Yam Hill, but yeah, it's right by the north stairs, the 69th Street stairs.
Thank you. When you said on your street, it just kind of threw me because we are talking about parks.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that, Taylor Street. Well, what we're going to be able to do is we can send you a link to the webpage that has a lot of information regarding the project. And then we can have someone follow up with you directly to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, because I've been to the webpage and the light pole project frequently asked questions, and I've been actually all through the site. And here's pictures of the failure. I can pass that around, of the lamppost in Irving Park. And here's the one hit by the truck near our house. As you can see, the base did not come disconnected from the footing.
Mhm.
So I find it questionable that its fellow posts are going to be removed, because it doesn't seem to be a problem. So I'm just concerned that the city is jumping to conclusions and being really nervous about liability, which I guess I don't understand either, since it's against the law from the ordinance to attach anything to a light pole. So I don't see how that lawsuit could go forward. So I'm kind of curious about that too.
Well, whatever information we can share with you.
Okay.
And we'll have somebody contact you directly. And can we just ensure that we have Mr. Fry's contact information? Do you prefer a phone call?
You can email me, that's easy. appletechnician@gmail.com. I can give my phone number too. So 503.
Wait, can we make sure that your phone, your private phone number doesn't end up
On the internet?
out in the public? Yeah, just for
Um,
protection.
Thanks, Dr. Corbin.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll have you write it down before you go.
Okay,
Great. Certainly have somebody get back in touch with you. You're welcome to stay for as long as the meeting as you'd like.
okay.
And help
I'm-
yourself to
I haven't
refreshments.
been in the corporate world for a while, and so but I am aware of how these meetings go, and we may exit pretty quickly.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I understand. I can appreciate that.
Well, thank you very much for coming and sharing your concerns. It sounds like staff has your contact information and will follow up accordingly. So thank you, Adina, for ensuring that the concerns get addressed. With that, any other public comment, Michelle?
We do have a phone line tuning in. I'm not sure who it might be.
Yeah, hi, Michelle, it's Casey Mills. I am
Oh.
not being able to link by Zoom for some reason. I have no idea what's going on. So I'll keep trying. In the meantime, I'll listen.
Good to know. Thank you, Casey.
Casey, I thought I saw your name a second ago and then,
And I saw your wonderful faces. It was a flash.
oh, okay. I was like, I swear I saw your name a second ago and then now you're saying you can't. Okay. All right. Well, we'll take you in an audible fashion or whatever fashion you're able to join us. Any other public comment? I don't think there is.
No.
Okay, with that, are there any general announcements? If not, we will move to the submission of the letter to support the federal earmarks to replace the light posts. It will be identical to the one that we submitted to the Senate. Am I correct? Do I have the chambers correct? Okay, I wasn't sure which one had already been submitted. It's my understanding that the request is that we're submitting the identical letter to the House. So it shouldn't be a very contentious issue, but if there are any discussion on that point, you'll recall we took a vote on that over email a couple of weeks ago. I don't remember exactly what the timing was. Any discussion? If not, I will entertain a motion from the floor to submit a letter worded as our prior letter to the House.
So moved.
Thanks, Mike. Any second?
Second.
Thanks, Chris. Any further discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. And like seeing Randy's name also reminds me that he wanted to get moved up, so I'm going to switch Randy with the working group reports, and Randy will go immediately after Director Long's report. So I hope everybody had a chance to review the January meeting minutes that went out with your board packet. Any questions or corrections on those minutes? If not, I'll entertain a motion from the floor to approve the minutes as submitted.
I move to adopt the meetings.
Thanks, Alejandro. Any second?
Second,
I think that was Ally, but I'm not 100% sure.
yes, that was me.
Thanks, Ellie. Any discussion? If not, all in favor? Any opposition? Any abstentions?
I'm just right
Oh, because you weren't here.
here. I'm just here.
So Mike Elliott is abstaining because he was absent. With that, motion carries. Thank you. With that, We'll move to the director's report. Director Long.
Thanks, Bonnie. I was going to talk a little bit about the congressional direct spending support letter, but we've already covered that. Thank you. But I did want to note that in addition to the $5 million reallocation of maintenance, major maintenance funds, the $10 million earmark request, we also have a pending $2 million Metro bond application, and we continue to investigate other means by which to fund the gaps so that we can expedite removal and replacement of the light poles. And I also wanted to say, I know that we're going to be hearing, I think we're going to be hearing from Paul Agrimas. Is he here
Paul
today?
can't make it.
We're not going to be hearing from Paul regarding the Parks Levy Parks Levy Oversight Committee. But I wanted to remind folks that we are seeking new members for that committee. I sent an email around last week that sort of described the opportunity. We're looking for members would meet quarterly. They serve for 2-year terms with the option to reapply, and they can expect to commit approximately 7 hours each quarter, including the 2-hour meeting to that work. And so the applications are due Monday, April 3rd. And again, check your emails from last week. I sent a separate email from the board packet around that. I want to mention that tomorrow, Sue Ann Ho's midterm appointment to the Parks Board will be voted on at City Council. It's a time certain item at 10:05 a.m. I will be there. I believe, Bonnie, you're going to be joining me as well. Also tomorrow, the City Council will vote to delist 7 heritage trees and to designate 6 new heritage trees. For folks who don't know, the Heritage Tree Program was designated by City Council through Title 11 30 years ago. So the program recognizes and protects trees of significant size, age, historical association, or horticultural value. Not a council item, but I wanted to flag that the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability's off-road cycling master plan was published late last week. The plan will guide future decision-making on the best places to expand off-road cycling opportunities in Portland. It's important to note that building these facilities will require additional site-specific planning, community involvement, environmental review, and funding. So the master plan is just a framework. So just wanted to let everyone know, and I will drop the link in the chat if folks want to check that out. As usual, I hope that everyone had some time to read the monthly report. And I will pause to see if anyone has any questions regarding that report. Or anything else I said.
Looks like Alejandro's hand is up.
Hi, Alejandro.
Director Long, a quick follow-up on the off-road cycle master plan. Is there any communication plan in place? I think myself and many of us, I assume, just kind of learned through it through like different news outlets, but it doesn't seem to be like there was any statement from parts of the city on it. I'm curious about how that's going to be rolled out.
Yeah, there was a transmittal letter, and I believe that the webpage has been updated. So again, I'm going to drop that in the chat. I don't believe that there's any intended additional communication around that because so much was done over the last 7 or 8 years while they were planning that or working through the master plan. But I can touch base, we can touch base with BPS to see if there is. I just put the link in the chat.
Thank you.
Looks like Corbin has her hand up and then Mike's got his 10 up.
Yeah, I have a question regarding what is going to be the board's role in the North Portland Aquatic Center project? I'm seeing that there were 3 sites that were selected or have support of these different groups. I'm just wondering, where are we in this process?
I believe that might be covered with the through the land use and infrastructure working group in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, but it looks like Lauren's ready to address it to some degree. So Lauren, you want to go ahead? We might steal your thunder a little bit, David. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. Exactly what you said, Adina, is that we're gonna be talking to the Land Use and Infrastructure Committee during the public comment period. So we'll, the next meeting, we'll be talking to you.
Just for clarification, the next meeting, you're going to be talking to the infrastructure working group, not to the board. Is that correct?
That's right. That's right.
At what point does it come to the board? I always get a little worried when decisions are being made, not at board meetings, but in working groups. And that doesn't involve the whole board.
Yeah, I will just say that the site selection is not necessarily a Parks Board decision, but we always, want to encourage Parks Board feedback on the sites. There is a very robust community engagement and project advisory committee associated with the North Portland Aquatic Center. And so it would be preferred for us not to duplicate that work. We have a few, I believe we have a few board members, or no, we don't, but we do have a very robust community engagement process around it.
Yeah.
As the body that's supposed to be making sure that community engagement and decision-making is being accessible to community members, I would like to see us be part of the discussion a little bit more than where we currently are.
Lauren?
So there's an April 27th community workshop where they'll be presenting the 3 concept designs, which everyone can participate in. And that will allow us to set up for the site selection for the final site. And then Robin said there's the setup will include a 2-week online survey from April 27th to May 11th. And we'll be coming to the May 2nd Parks Board Land Use and Infrastructure Subcommittee. So that would allow them to review and respond to the concepts during the same community response window from 4/27 to 5/11. So that's what we have planned right now. Doesn't mean we can't do something different, but that's what we have planned.
Is this an appropriate place to open up discussion to see where if they can come to the full board versus just a working group? It's such a massive project that's going to impact Portland. I would like to see a little bit more engagement from the board versus hearing about these in emails and newsletters outside of the work that we're doing at these meetings. But that's my personal opinion. I don't know how other people feel about it.
Maybe the thing to do is we can ask either Robin or some combination of Robin and Ken, because is Ken coordinating the community engagement for that? I do know that there were 90-some applications submitted for that advisory committee, including some members of the board who were not selected. And so I hear what you're saying, Corbin, and I appreciate it, but I also hear what Director Long is saying in the context of, not wanting to be parallel with what the advisory group is doing. But I do think it's a valid concern in terms of ensuring that the board has an opportunity to provide comment to those who were not selected as part of that advisory group. Does that seem like a reasonable thing? Lauren, your hand's still up, or maybe it's up again, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's up again, actually. So would it make sense for whomever from the board would like to participate? It's a virtual meeting that we do with the Land Use and Infrastructure Committee. So would it make sense for us to do that? To send it to whomever is interested?
I think the question becomes if we have a lot of board members that are interested, then we will possibly have quorum, which means that we wouldn't be able to move forward with that meeting. And again, this is really about how we're situating the board and what we bring, what we're supposed to do, what our charge is, and something this big to have board members not being a part of it, the decision-making process, but it not necessarily coming to the board as well. I feel like there's some room for improvement around what our charge is as the board, and then not going to 10, 20 different meetings to participate in these community engagement processes versus letting us know what the process is. And I think you did let us know about that, but coming to the working group instead of the board, I feel like I think there's some wiggle room for us to have a discussion about this. And I don't want to take up too much time during the board, but I think something like this is exactly where it should be seen at the board level, not just the working group level.
I'm happy to look at, we've got a sort of a agenda parking lot for the Parks Board agenda. To my eye, it looks like we have April already full with items. And I'm afraid that if we wait until May, that'll be beyond the time frame for feedback. Is that correct, Lauren? I'm sorry, I wasn't tracking the dates.
Yeah, actually, that would work. It's the feedback window is from April 27th to May 11th. So technically it would work that first Tuesday, right?
It's the first Tuesday in
May.
May, second Tuesday, it's May 9th.
May 9th, yeah. So it would still work. It would be before we close the community outreach if we wanted to do that, yeah.
I would appreciate it because I think there are these times where making sure that the board is actually doing the work that the board is charged to do versus having board members going to multiple meetings and not necessarily having the direct communication be between board members. So I do appreciate that, and thank you for creating the time and space to discuss this.
I just want to reiterate that we have a lot of projects that we create advisory committees for, and we invite board participation. And I just want to make sure that we don't set a precedent of duplicating our community engagement efforts. So
I don't think it's a duplication. I think it's presenting a community engagement process to the board for the board to have feedback, especially since none of the board members were actually chosen to be on that advisory.
Well, the presentation wouldn't be about the community engagement process. We actually did present on the community engagement process several months ago. This would be on the site selection conversation around the three sites. So, but we're happy to do it. And I hear you, Dr. Corbin. I'm just saying that moving forward, I'm sensitive to duplicating efforts where we have a system in place. That's all.
Yeah, but if the system in place doesn't bring in the board, where I think it's critical, especially when you have something as monumental as a gentrifying event being said around a particular project, making sure that we're informed is super important to me. And again, I don't want to beat this drum. I want to be respectful, but I also understand that when I was supposedly sworn on or came on this board, that we have a particular charge that we're supposed to uphold, and making sure that this is an equitable process and that the board is accessible to community members that don't necessarily have gobs of surplus time to go to 5 or 6 meetings to make sure that either we get our piece heard or we're fully aware about what's going on. Again, we are still trying to figure this out. I don't want to put pressure on you to the point that, you don't bend but break, but I think we need to have some discussions about what comes to the board and what can be situated within working groups.
Yeah, I'll remind everyone that we're planning to have that conversation around the work plan soon, and hopefully this particular topic will be resolved.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Any other items on the director's report? Mike, you had your 10 up a minute
good
ago.
now.
You're-
Thanks. Yeah.
Okay.
We wore you down.
You wore me down.
Yep.
Anything else, Dina?
No.
Okay. With that, we'll move into the working group reports, and we're trying a little hybrid thing here where we get a brief report from the working group chairs, as well as opportunity for questions. So Board Affairs Working Group, Casey, are you still here with us?
I'm here. I
Oh,
have
good.
no idea what's going on with my camera. I think it's actually my computer and not the Zoom. So you get the best look you have of me. Most of the last Board Affairs Working Group was about rethinking the roles of the board and PP&R, which actually falls into the discussion we just had regarding, what should be brought to the board and when and how that happens. I think at the end of the day, what we've decided to do is that Michelle and Director Long have developed a wonderful smart sheet that describes all the projects that are presently going. And I think what we're planning on doing is to go to each working group and open the discussion up, having them take a look at the plan, the smart sheet, and then also to discuss what was decided in the Board Affairs Working Group as to kind of the guardrails of things that should be brought to the board and how the board should be engaged in projects. So if you haven't heard from Michelle yet, we'll probably, she and I hopefully will be contacting each board chair or each working group chair to have a presentation before them. Any questions?
Thank you, Casey. Any questions for Casey? And my apologies, I had said that I was going to put Randy before the working group reports, and then I immediately forgot. So Randy,
No worries. I'm sorry to step in front.
Not at
but I have a conflicting meeting I could not resolve. So thanks for giving me some time now. Big things on our plate. I want to make you aware of the Joey Pope Award for Parks Leadership. The applications, or excuse me, the nominations are open for that. You can self-nominate. But please pass this around. We did our first one. Well, actually, the headline of this is, we set out about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, to create an endowed fund for emerging parks leaders. And Joey Pope, who was our founding chair and also was the chair of Parks 2020, gave the lead gift for that, hence the name, and was willing to match up to $250,000. We completed that fund, so we actually exceeded it. So $500,000 endowed fund to leverage, emerging parks leadership, and that's each of these awards are going to be $10,000 plus technical assistance. So we're not just handing people a check. We're actually going to partner with them and see how we can help them in other ways. And our first one was last spring, and it was People of Color Outdoors who got that. And suddenly I'm blanking on the founder's name. I don't know why.
Pamela Slaughter.
Thank you. It's late in the day. And we had a great group of nominees, of sort of finalists for that, and it just went swimmingly. And we're going to do another one, which we'll give out at our May Friends and Allies Summit. So I put the link in the chat. Also, there's nominations open for our Parks Champions, which are volunteer leaders. So basically it's people giving their time to parks, and it isn't just a badge or a ribbon. We give them $1,500 that they can direct to any organization that they work with or to any parks organization. So and we usually do 2 of those. So that's all coming up. I would love to see some nominations from the board. It'd be awesome. In other news, we completed the sort of first phase of our public outreach effort for O'Brien Square last week. We brought a lot of people together. We had over 300 people who filled out our survey. about what they would like to see in O'Brien Square. We had around 80 people in various focus groups, and the focus groups spanned downtown residents, downtown retailers, food, hoteliers. We had focus groups with the clients of the Behavioral Health Resource Center. We had a focus group with youth, downtown youth through PAIR that was organized by PAIR. And we also had a really meaningful discussion between both a number of bureaus who were involved in this, PBOT Parks and PMO with the mayor's office, and the mayor's office was there, and Karen from Dan Ryan's office was there, and also the leadership of the Behavioral Health Resource Center, which probably some of you have read some of the headlines around that. And also, Pioneer Courthouse Square, and mall management, and Clean and Safe. So basically all of the entities that have their fingers in one way or another in terms of making downtown safe and clean and activated. And so was the first kind of time that all those people had sort of been brought together at one time. Various groups of them had been in the past, but I think it was the first time that the BHRC, the Behavioral Health Resource Leadership, was kind of in the same room with like Parks and PBOT. And so it was really a great discussion. Everybody got their stuff out on the table, and I think it'll be, and everybody wants to meet again. And so as we move ahead to when, O'Brien is demolished, which will likely be completed this fall, there's a lot of people at the table. Oh, I forgot, we did a task force with about 30 arts organizations, all of whom are keenly interested in doing programming in parks. And that ranged from the symphony, that's a next door neighbor, and literary arts, to Brown Girls Rising, to PAIR, again, the youth organization. It was small, large, young, old, lots of people who have an investment in this. So I think we really got at some stuff. So all that information was then fed into a process that Portland State University's Center for Public Interest Design and the Harvard Loeb Fellowship, 5 members of that group got together and sort of sorted through it, and made some sort of high-level recommendations of things that could be realized, might be realized in the park, and then turned it over to 15 design teams from various architecture firms who created sort of visions of this. So there's no winner. It's not a contest or anything. It was just a way of kind of thinking about how the park could operate in this very, very complicated environment with a Ritz-Carlton on one end and a group of social services on the other. So we're still kind of picking up the pieces. That was a enormous effort by our small team. And we'll have the results up on our website by Thursday, and we'll send the link out to y'all. And we feel like we made a major step forward in terms of getting a wide group of people to think about the future of this complicated but important downtown public space.
Thank you, Randy. Really excited about what happens there with O'Brien Square. Any questions for Randy and the foundation's report? If not, we'll move to back to the working group reports and land use and infrastructure. David.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Randy.
Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you, David.
Sweet. We had, I don't know, 6 or 7 items on the agenda for last week's land use and infrastructure working group. Sorry for getting out the minutes late, but it just seems to, I said this last month, it's hard for me to get the meeting minutes out in time for the packet. So hopefully you guys got those yesterday or whenever I sent them out. The topics were a brief update on some SDC changes that may be coming down the stream, I think on March 15th, there was going to be a proposal to the city council for waiving the rights for STC charges for conversion of office buildings to residential. And so I think the Parks was weighing in on the perceived loss of revenue from those STC waived charges. Randy gave us a great update, just like he did on the O'Brien Square charrette that's happening this week. Lauren gave us a brief update on the capital project selection process. Lauren also talked to us a little bit about the Holman Dock update, and that it sounds like Parks will not be entering into an agreement to help with the Holman Dock and putting all of the eggs in our Cathedral Park dock access. We did get an update on the North Portland Aquatic Center siting and how the top 5 sites were whittled down to the top 3 sites. And then we were informed that the design team for that is going to be looking at test fits for all 3 of those sites. And that's what I think we'll be reviewing at the next Land Use and Infrastructure Working Group meeting. And then we had a little brief discussion on the light pole safety and removal replacement project. Lauren, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, thanks, David, for that. I just wanted to clarify a couple things. It looks like we actually will be taking the Holman Dock probably. Adina, you can jump in here if you want. I think that we're still having discussions with Prosper about the conditions
Okay.
of taking that dock, but it's leaning more towards us taking the dock. We're still going to be improving the dock at Cathedral Park though. So that was one thing I wanted to mention. The other thing I wanted to mention was, Bonnie, you had asked about the lengths of the pools. And so it is a 25 meter by 25 yard pool. So it's both as one option, and the 50 meter pool is the other option. And the third thing I wanted to say was with regard to the light pole discussion we went to the Historic Landmarks Commission for a discussion with them, a preliminary discussion with them. And where they landed was we are going to have to go through historic review for Ladd's Addition, Lair Hill Park, and Mount Tabor Park. That's all. I just wanted
Thank
to.
you, Lauren. Aaron, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, but
I saw
sorry,
briefly.
when you're done, David.
But no, that's it. This is perfect.
Of course, then I muted myself again. Thank you. I did have a question about the SDCs. It wasn't clear to me based on your statement kind of where Parks landed and weighing in on that. I guess it kind of piqued my interest because I have been having some conversations in housing with people about the huge expense of converting commercial real estate into housing and, you know, having to gut these entire buildings and all that. And I guess I would be concerned about SDCs not being collected and then what that means in the long run for Parks, and was kind of curious where Parks landed on that.
I don't know if David or Lauren want to try and address that question, but I had that exact same question, Aaron, and I asked it at the time with the staffer whose name I'm forgetting. Daniel. thank you. And I asked that specifically is, you know, the foregone revenue that would be generated with those SDCs. Is there anything to offset that? And the short answer was no. However, the foregone revenues can be considered a match in certain grant programs, which is kind of a silver lining. And I think that that's a really valid potential way to address it, in as much as grant funds may become available. Lauren, is there anything else that you can add? I mean, I think we all are aware of the, you know, the housing situation, and, you know, removing those barriers to housing production are just so important. Lauren?
Right. So that's the purpose of that. Of the SDC waiver was primarily targeted at those existing buildings downtown that will need seismic upgrades and retrofits in order to become housing. And so they're trying to incentivize that. And that's why they're talking about the reduction in SDCs.
Yeah, and this is Claudio. Just to make clear that this resolution that's going to council is subsequent to, it's part of the 90-day resolution that was passed by council a month and a half ago. This was that they wanted to move forward with something along these lines was already passed by council, and that this is just the implementation of it. We've had some discussions with the mayor's office as they're moving this forward. I think that nobody has any real sense of what the fiscal impact would be, what the foregone revenue would look like. When we look back several years at sort of which projects have transitioned from commercial to residential, there's very few. So we would expect the number to be on the lower side. However, the mayor's office, as part of the filing, indicated they would expect something in the neighborhood of 15 developments over the course of the ordinance. I think it sunsets in 2027, so it is a short time frame. They may extend it, but we'll see when we get there. But in the meantime, the mayor's office is expecting that somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 properties would be developed under this ordinance. So that's the most we know, and it's very, very hard to anticipate what the actual impact will be, because we don't really have any sense of who how much uptake there might be on it, and we don't have a lot of historicals. So,
Dr. Corlin?
Do you happen to know what type of residential housing they're expecting? Are these going to be condos? Is it going to be low income housing? Do we know what the housing is going to, when it says residential, what type of housing are we talking about?
I don't believe there is a low income requirement, and I don't think that they specify the ownership the ownership structure. I think it's merely to incentivize the creation of residential out of commercial, and as Lauren said, to bring them up to seismic code.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for David and the Land Use and Infrastructure Working Group? If not, we'll move to the Financial Sustainability Work Group. I got an email from Ilana just a few minutes before the meeting started that she had a family emergency and was unable to attend, but she did send a brief overview, which I will read to you. And I will mention that two of the items that are raised here, we have actual agenda items on later in the agenda. So the Financial Sustainability Working Group did meet on the 23rd February, and discussion included change to the new budgeting structure and the need to reiterate the use of levy funds as a final payment rather than displacement of general fund. Changes to the cost recovery program and ways to center the Bureau values in that work. And the ask for the board to support the legislative proposal that would allow the city to create a separate parks district. So those two items, we have the special parks district discussion later on the agenda, as well as a spring bump report, which is budget monitoring process, which Claudio is going to provide, I think, later in the agenda.
Yes.
Any questions that I will try to struggle through with Claudio's help? Corbin.
So I don't have a question, I have a request, and I probably made this request before. Can we disaggregate the data on race and stop using this binary of white and non-white folks by saying whites and BIPOC? I would love to see the racial breakdown of the employees by race designation versus white and non-white categories. I think it will help us determine which groups are being included into managerial and other sort of staff positions at Portland Parks and Rec.
Thank you. I don't know
Yeah.
who to direct this question to.
I don't know.
Margaret, I was kind of going this direction.
Yes, we actually do have a breakdown of our employee demographics, and so is something that we could look at providing. Is there anything in particular or a particular document that this is referencing?
It just said as of January of 2023, 64% of PP&R employees are white and 36% are Black, Indigenous, people of color. I would love to understand which races are maybe getting a foothold into Portland Parks and Rec, and maybe what type of outreach that needs to be done to other communities.
And what document are you looking at? Can we just get clarification on that?
Are we at the Park Levies Oversight Committee?
No.
Oh, that's where I thought we were.
That's why I had that confused. I was like, I'm not sure which document.
Sorry, I thought that's where we were.
It's okay.
It's
My
okay.
bad.
And unfortunately,
It
Paul's
hap-
not here, but luckily we have Parks Levy Oversight people who hopefully can help us address that.
Well, I don't think it's specific
Right, fair enough.
the Parks Levy Oversight Group, but it's a reoccurring pattern in which how we address race or talk about race within our meetings. And I'm just asking for the full disaggregated data on race when race is presented in these meetings. So I will save myself a little bit of embarrassment by talking out of turn and focusing
Not
on
at
the
all,
wrong
and I
document.
not at all, and I appreciate you bringing it up, and luckily we do have Kenya Williams on the line. So in terms of thinking about, ensuring that race and ethnicity is appropriately disaggregated, maybe it's something that we can continue to address and try to strive to do throughout any reporting that is provided. But I appreciate
I
that.
would-
It actually falls under
I don't-
Margaret's
Okay.
purview and not Ken's.
And just to conclude, I would love to see a very diversified Portland Parks and Recreation team that includes folks from different colors, gender identities, abilities, disabilities. I just want to make sure that we're making sure that everybody counts and everybody's included. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Any other questions with respect to financial sustainability work group?
I'll just note that Todd has.
Oh, sorry, Todd.
I mean, just since we're on the topic, so Dr. Carbon, I think we can give you a readout because we're tracking race and ethnicity on, for instance, our candidate pools, our interview, who makes it to interviews, who we hire, our supervisor manager, our full-time versus seasonal part-time workforce. That's been all part of our Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland work to kind of get better at our measurements and then also do the disaggregation. The city of Portland tracks women right now, right, for the hiring. And so we have some work to do on the gender side, we know. I think there's a lot of information that we're collecting that we could give like a report out at some future data at a Parks Board meeting.
We can certainly do that.
Yeah, I'm confident that you have the data. I just don't want to truncate it in our meeting and bifurcate
you.
it in like white and non-white. That's all.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else on that topic or anything else for the financial sustainability work group?
So Bonnie, this is Claudio. I'm super happy to do the spring bump report. I know it's a little bit later in the agenda. I did not see my name later in the agenda, and I've actually got an appointment that I need to run to in a few minutes. Would you mind if I did the spring bump report real quick?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Sure.
Go ahead. Thank you.
As you mentioned, spring bump budget monitoring process. We're submitting that to the city budget office on March 16. That's on Thursday. That submission includes projections for year end, updates on decision packages from past processes and budget notes, and it also includes supplemental budget requests, so requests to change this year's budget. We, typically don't have a lot in the spring bump. That's pretty much the case this year. We are requesting, we've got 2 general fund requests, one for compensation set aside. And that is, for those that are unfamiliar, it is an amount that is set aside for general fund bureaus. It's equivalent to this year's cost of living adjustment plus health benefit increases. For parks, that comes to about $2.8 million. As I said, it's been set aside for bureaus. And most large bureaus, police, fire, typically ask for their entire amount. So has Parks in the past, and we'll be asking for ours. The reason I'm bringing this up is because last year with the levy, this actually it became a little non-standard request. It was treated somewhat differently because when the city budget office and council looked at our budget, they saw underspending. But of course, the underspending is in the levy, and the idea of the way that we've structured the leverage funding model and that the way that waterfall is intended to work is we spend all of our general fund first, and then we spend the parks levy, and that's a way of preserving levy and ensuring that we maximize it over the course of the 5 years. And so we expect that it'll be a conversation again this year. So I wanted to bring it to the board's attention. Similarly, labor agreement costs. So we've a number. We're currently in the middle of a round of labor negotiations. Some have been settled. Some are still outstanding. For the ones that are settled, typically general fund bureaus will receive an increase in their general fund related to the increased labor costs. So we would be requesting that as well. And that has a similar issue associated with it. The council and the city budget office may say, well, you've got levy that can cover it this year. Why don't you do that? But same issue. Yes, we could, and no, that would not be in keeping with our commitment to voters to maximize the levy as an incremental resource for incremental services. So those are the 2 big ones. In order to highlight that issue, the other big change that we're going to be making is we're actually going to be doing an adjustment to our parks levy balance and reducing our budget for the levy as it reimburses the general fund. So we'll be reducing that reimbursement to address the projected underspending. That reduction would then have the levy falling to balance rather than showing as underspending, and that calculation is being done based on an assumption of receiving compensation set aside and labor agreement costs. So were they not to grant us those what are typically pretty pro forma increases, then they would need to direct us to increase the levy spending again in order to cover it. So we're working with our commissioner's office around those requests. The spring bump there's a work session in early April with a hearing on the spring bump in mid-April. I don't think the hearing has been scheduled yet, but we're expecting it to be right around the middle of April. So that is what I've got on spring bump. Happy to take any questions and support any conversation.
Thank you, Claudio. Any questions on that? Did we put that in here because we wanted a letter of support? Now that
I think there was some discussion about providing a letter of support. So yeah, happy to support that that conversation.
I just don't remember the discussion at all. Well, you don't need a letter of support, that's fine. Carry on. Any questions for Claudio? Thanks, Claudio, for jumping in there. With that, we'll move to the community engagement working group. Erin, I know you're otherwise distracted. I think you're deferring to Corbin on this. Is that correct, Corbin?
That's correct. Hopefully I have the right document up this time around. So the community engagement working group is actually started reviewing the second draft of an internal Portland Parks board public comment procedure. So this is guardrails for board members. We may not have our next president that can, or chair. What is your title again, Bonnie? It's becoming one of those days.
I think chair.
Daylight savings time, chair. Okay. And so
like being
we may not
first.
have a savvy chair that really understands the staff and understands what they do. And so we want to make sure that we don't create situations where we're asking information of staff on site. And so trying to figure out what that procedure is. And so we focused on what are the processes, procedures, and possibly decision-making opportunities. So really talking around the logistics as we continue to review this document. And staff said that they're willing to build a system, and this might be part of the smart sheets that Michelle put together around making sure that when there is comments that as a board, if there are particular topics or situations that we want to follow through on or follow up on later, that we have sort of like a tickler file that we can go back and make sure that we're not losing anything in the cracks as we move forward. So that is what I have to report.
Thank you, Corbin. Any questions for Corbin or the community engagement work group? If not, nominating committee, again, Ilana couldn't make it, but she had a little bit of a delay, but she's gonna send out an email this week to get the nominating committee meeting set up. The idea is that we're gonna get the questions finalized so that that can get posted with the Office of Community and Civic Life. And there's a nice wide period where we're contacting our networks and reaching out to folks we think would be good board members. And if you haven't already expressed interest in serving on that committee, please do. We're going to have Director Long is going to participate, Michelle, of course, and Karen from Commissioner Ryan's office is also going to participate.
I'll be sending out the email for Alana on setting up the next meeting.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I'm helping Alana set up the next meeting for the
Okay.
nominating committee, and I've also submitted, or I've emailed the Office of Community and Civic Life to review the standard application so we can review it when we have the meeting.
Okay, terrific. Yeah, I know that we had wanted to refine those questions that went out a little bit. So I know she wanted to have a meeting first. Any questions on that process? As I mentioned, Paul wasn't able to make it. He did send a written report on the Parks Levy Oversight Committee. Are there any questions on that I will probably defer to Todd or somebody? Oh, Todd, your tent is up.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, legacy tent.
Legacy tent.
That I would probably defer to Todd to try and answer. Anyway. And Corbin, we've noted your question and request regarding disaggregation of racial and ethnic data, which I think has been heard, and hopefully we can address that not only on the levy oversight reports, but other things as well. Any other questions on that? If not, that takes us to, we did the foundation report, we did the spring bump report, so that takes us to the Special Parks District discussion. Is Sarah doing this or is Todd? There she is. Nope, there's Sarah. Hi, Sarah, welcome.
Good evening. All right, well, this was an item that, as Bonnie mentioned, we discussed in the last Financial Sustainability Working Group and wanted to bring forward to the whole board. I know an email also went out to the whole board with a little more information. So thank you for giving me a little bit of time on the agenda. My thought tonight was I would just do a really quick overview of the history behind this legislative bill, kind of go over a few key points in the bill itself, and then really, most of the time on this hopefully will be for you all to have discussion and I can answer any questions that you have. I'm going to share my screen here. Right, and are folks now seeing some slides?
Yeah.
Perfect. And let me just see if I can make this not be the whole screen though. Okay, I'm gonna stop share just briefly. You know,
You want me to drive?
yeah, let me have you drive, Todd, because I'm not seeing an option where I can not have it be the full screen for some reason here.
All right. Mind sending me the deck again, make sure I have the right one.
Yep.
If you have an external monitor, you have the option, Sarah, but if you don't, I think you're pretty limited.
It's just me on my laptop, and I feel like this has worked before, but let's make it just be right. Will you let me know when you've gotten it, Todd?
Yeah.
Oh, it says it's bigger than it allows. Okay. Okay, hold on. Okay, we'll just resent it. And maybe while Todd is pulling that up, I will go ahead and start with a little bit of the background that I promised, or the history of the bill, if that works. So I know some of this is not going to be sort of brand new, hot off the press information, but I think it's important to kind of go back and start with where this really began, which was really with kind of the Sustainable Future program, and it started in 2019, again, really looking to support service levels with appropriate funding levels. Some of the early work of that program included creating an alternative funding task force during the summer and fall of 2019. And if you can just move on to the next slide, Todd. Yeah. So during that kind of summer and fall, that task force provided advice and consultation on really a number of alternative funding options. And one of those was the idea of a park and recreation special district. And then in November of 2019, City Council held a Sustainable Future work session, and City Council reviewed kind of both our financial and our service level forecasts, and also discussed potential alternative funding options. We received support from City Council in that work session to pursue additional funding, really to change course, get the Bureau on track to fulfill service levels. And specifically, Council encouraged us to continue looking at, a variety of funding options like income tax, the temporary levy that we currently have in place, formation of a special district, capital bonds, and a food and beverage tax. And also in that work session, one thing that City Council discussed that's really sort of distinct about the special district is that a special district under present statutes would either have to have its entirely own independent governance structure with separately elected board members, or it also has the option, kind of like the Multnomah County Library District does, to have a county commission serve as its board if a district was located solely within one county. But without a change in state law, City Council wouldn't be able to serve as the governing board of a special parks district. So in that 2019 City Council work session, Commissioner Fish noted that for a special district to be considered, he really recommended pursuing a change in state law so that a City Council could be considered as the governing body. In early 2020, after the work session, we were really exploring and advancing work on a number of the funding options per council's direction, but then COVID impacted kind of both our services and our finances. So given kind of the immediate operating funding gap, we pulled a bond which could address capital maintenance need and that temporary levy, which could address operational needs. And, we also did actually also poll both on the same ballot, but we didn't see support for that. So we saw highest polling support for an operating levy on its own, which is what we took to the ballot and what Portland voters approved in November of 2020. The 2020 levy has been fantastic in allowing us to really avoid pretty devastating service cuts and make progress on operating service levels, but it is a temporary solution and it didn't solve all of our long-term ongoing financial needs. So to advance development of funding options further, Director Long convened a ballot initiative task force this past summer. And that group met 3 times between July and September to review the Bureau's funding position and advise on a number of funding options and next steps. That task force included 12 members of the community with representation from community partner groups, the Urban Forestry Commission, the Parks Board, the Parks Foundation, and thank you to Casey, Paul, Bonnie, and Sabrina for participating and providing input on that process. And then I attended your August and October board meetings, sharing an update of that work, including sort of updated information about our funding needs, that we had convened a ballot initiative task force, and the funding options that we reviewed. If you want to advance the slide deck. So this next slide is one that I shared at your October meeting. So this was a summary of the funding options that were really recommended by that ballot initiative task force for further consideration. The ones in bold at the top are the ones that were really recommended to consider further. And I've highlighted it was including the idea of a special district. I won't go over sort of all the information that I know we shared with you in your meeting and with them, but one thing I'll highlight is that a key difference between the special district property tax option and the temporary levy is that a special district can include a permanent property tax rate. So that really was a key consideration, for example, for Multnomah County Library District when it was formed, replacing decades really of temporary levies with that permanent district with its permanent rate. Next slide. All right, so this is another slide from that October presentation where we shared sort of the next steps that we were working on advancing funding options. And it included that we were working on pursuing a statute change to allow for that city council governance option for a potential future, it would be voter approved Parks and Recreation District. So we worked with our Office of Government Relations here within the city to prepare an issue paper for council to consider. And then this past January, so January of 2023, our city council approved this as part of their city state legislative agenda. So we've taken another step forward in that process. If you could advance the slide, Todd. And we're excited that Representative Travis Nelson from North Portland has agreed to be the chief sponsor for this bill. And Representative Hua Wen from East Portland has also agreed to sign on as a co-sponsor. So a little bit about the bill itself, just to be really clear, this bill does not create a park and recreation special district. So what it does do is it proposes to amend the park and recreation district statutes to allow first for a city council governance option in cities that have populations over 600,000. So that for Oregon, that's just Portland. It also allows for a city council to be able to initiate sending a district to the ballot for voters to consider. And then if a proposed district included a permanent maximum tax rate, the county in which the majority of territory lies, so for us, that would be Multnomah County, would have approval over that actually being added to the ballot. So this was a negotiation with Multnomah County to ensure their support for this bill. Just one other thing I'd like to highlight. I know this was in the one pager that was sent out, but we're not sort of the trailblazers on this one. So this is pretty similar to what actually Washington has done. The Washington statutes around park districts were expanded by their legislature in 2002 to allow for a city council governance option. And both Seattle and later Olympia actually also formed park districts with their respective city councils serving as those governing bodies. In 2014, and then for Olympia in 2015. So how it works is the Seattle City Council kind of convenes for city business and then convenes again for park district business. The employees of Seattle Parks and Rec are sort of still city employees. The land is still city land, but there's a permanent guaranteed revenue source set aside for specific outlined services for the Parks District to provide. And that was included in the district formation proposal that was submitted to voters. So not only does the district itself now have a permanent rate, but the City of Seattle Council, in taking the initiative to the ballot, also signed an IGA with the Park District, guaranteeing that it would continue to receive its share of the general fund revenues. So they could really ensure more sustainable, planful funding levels. So it worked quite well in Seattle and has worked to support their park system. And that's an option that this bill would create for Portland to consider in the future. So, you know, the ask that we sent out, either as individuals or if you would be willing to consider as a board, we'd love for you to join some of the other organizations that are signed on to support this bill. And of course, happy to answer any questions that you have about it.
Thanks, Dr. Corbin. IGA means intergovernmental agreement. In this case, it was between the Seattle Parks District and the City of Seattle.
Thank you.
Any questions for Sarah? And I will say, I'm really sad that Ilana and Paul are not here because they have been probably the most, they're probably the most knowledgeable with respect to Parks District potential on our board. And unfortunately, both of them are absent today. But does anyone else have any questions for Sarah? I have some questions, but I don't want to. Go ahead, Mike.
So thanks, Sarah. That was helpful. Just one quick question. Does the bill provide, in allowing for a city governance option, the structure or how that would actually take place? Is it the entire city council? Can it be a subset? Is that outlined in the bill?
Yeah, so right now it would be the entire city council. So the city council that serves as the City of Portland City Council would also be able to serve as the Park District City Council.
Thanks.
Casey?
I got a follow-up to what Mike asked, and that is, okay, so what happens after we follow through on the charter amendments? What body would then be in charge of the Park District?
So it would be the new city council as of January 1st, 2025, because they are still a city council. So we intentionally wrote it without sort of specifying a number of membership or anything like that, so that whatever form the Portland City Council takes, so long as it's a thing called a Portland City Council, it could be the governing body of a park district. Does that make sense? It could be 13 members as a city council.
Yes, and that was, yes, it does make sense. 13's a lot.
Alejandro?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, for the information. This might be a basic question, but is the idea initially that it would be just one special district for the entire city, or are we thinking about different districts within city limits?
So this provides for a governance option, and we have not, you know, even having a door to consider modeling it further, we haven't made any decisions of exactly sort of what we would propose as the district. But I think, you know, we would not be looking to sort of further carve out the city. We would be seeing if we could support the city as a whole, city park system as a whole.
Thank you.
Adam.
Sarah, I'm not sure if you have an answer to this question, but to sort of dovetail on that last answer is, who would decide what those districts look like? Would it be the 13 members of the city council in 2025? Or would that go to a public ballot?
Yeah, so the how it is proposed right now is that it would be the same process that other things make it to the ballot that are City of Portland things. So a city council, Portland City Council, could refer something to the ballot. So they would be in the driving seat of deciding what they wanted to refer. And then if that thing included a permanent rate, Multnomah County Commission would also get a chance to say if they agreed with that going to the ballot. And then if it made it to the ballot, Portland voters would decide then if they wanted to enact that.
I have a question with respect to, so I guess the question I have is, I understand the idea is that to provide the option of city council being the governing body, just as, for example, the county council can currently do, but cities cannot. I guess the question I have is, you know, there is some value in having independent governance. And this obviously would, I mean, it wouldn't take that, I mean, we could still establish a special district that had independent governance with another governing body that was not the city council. As your material did point out, it doesn't remove those options in any way. But the question I have is, with respect to the, you know, would it affect compression or any other factors in terms of how we would reimburse, like, say, children's levy or other things like that? Does it affect those things in any way?
So whether it is independently governed or would be a city council governed, that would have no change on what the potential compression impacts would be. What would change is any district, regardless of how it's governed, that did include a permanent property tax rate would compress other jurisdictions. So, and in a different way than our temporary levy compresses jurisdictions, because right now a temporary levy only compresses the other temporary levies, but permanent property taxes would compress others. So we actually had Portland State University do some modeling for us of at kind of our current levy rate, what compression could look like. So we have a sense of how much it would be for those other entities that are also on a permanent property tax rate basis. So the largest actually would be City of Portland. None of them were over sort of 2 million in the aggregate, but the largest would be City of Portland. That was part of the conversation with Multnomah County and why they wanted to be in kind of the approval chair there. And a number of others were sort of smaller, like under $50,000 each. Yeah.
Yes, the other question I have is, sorry, I'm asking questions. That's why I let everybody else go first. The other question I have is, if parks were to do this, I mean, it seems like other bureaus could potentially do it as well. I mean, although this bill addresses parks specifically, is that correct?
Right. So how the statutes are set up is there's a 198 is a chapter of the statutes that sort of provides overall direction for how special districts can run. And then there's a specific section for many different types of districts, whether it's water or sewer or fire, or ours is Parks and Recreation. Metro is under the kind of metropolitan service district. So what we're amending is just the Parks and Recreation specific district. And each of those sections kind of has different setups in terms of additional layers of district considerations, how they can be formed, how they can be governed. It depends on which one you're looking at. So this really is just specific to the Parks and Recreation chapter of the statutes.
Right, and so I'm sorry, I'm going to follow up on that. So if it only addresses the Parks and Recreation, so no other special districts, they are limited in that city council could not govern them as well. They would need independent governance. I guess that's what my concern about this is, that it makes a special carve out just for parks, which I love parks. Obviously, I volunteer to do this. But it feels like a weird special carve out to me. And that's the part that it feels weird.
I mean, I think one of the reasons why we have special districts is because sometimes the service is provided outside, or it's in multiple jurisdictions. So you might have it covering multiple cities or multiple counties. And so you want to create a new governance body that covers those multiple jurisdictions and be able to collect taxes and fees and then provide services to that service area. We are special, right? We're the largest city in the state. We have a service that's provide mostly, a little around the edges, within the city jurisdictional boundary. But for some reason, I think it's just because by chance, really, if we have state law that's written that excludes this option from Portland voters to allow like accountable services around the service, Parks and Recreation in the city of Portland. Multnomah County's never going to run the Parks District in the city of Portland. And then the independent body option just has a lot of complexity around a park system like ours that's 15% of the land area of the city of Portland, over 100 years old, lots of assets that are way beyond their useful life. What unfunded governance body would want to take on all of that liability without any funding source? Because creating the governance itself is kind of all we're talking about here, not actually any of the funding.
I
So-
understand. Right.
No, I know you understand, but not everyone else does, I don't think. And so it's really important just to focus on, this is about governance, not about really funding. And we just don't have that option right now to provide predictable services to Portlanders, right? And I'll give you an example is of our operating budget, about $48 million is from the levy, but about $80 million is from the general fund. And that general fund is approved on an annual basis. So every June, we wait, we all do, to see if city council passes the budget with the $80 million or so in our budget. 3 weeks later, we're supposed to operationalize it. There's no commitment from the city council on that $80 million for it to show up next year. It's a year-to-year decision where Seattle with the Parks District has gotten that commitment from the city council that the $80 million won't be defunded next year or the year after that. Right now, Portland has that risk on a year-to-year basis.
Like, understand. Ellie?
Just a quick question. I'm wondering if there's any ways that risks or challenges that you would see in having to adapt to this new system if it moved forward. So is there anything you anticipate needing to do, or that anything you'll come up against?
I think there would need to be a lot of evaluation if this passes, but that's, we have done some work to understand what the nature of a district could look like. And we have held off engaging in further conversation until we know if this can be an actual option that could be considered. I'm not aware of any particular risk associated with adding this as a governance option.
Thank you.
Yeah, Ellie, I think if you're just wearing a parks hat only, there's risk in our current system that this mitigates. But if you're taking a broad view of all city services or put on like the city manager hat, you may not be for this because it takes some flexibility away of maybe next year I need to defund parks to pay for other city services. And so that would, add some risk to the city as a whole, but it would be at the detriment of, Parks and Rec services.
Thank you.
Adam?
This might be a redundant question, but kind of what I'm sort of imagining is, Todd, after your explanation, it seems like that this would provide, stable revenue source, totally get that. Where I'm really sort of hung up on is how that special district is going to be drawn. And Sarah, you touched on this briefly, and I apologize again if this is redundant, but sort of what I'm imagining here is the potential that historically underserved neighborhoods in the city of Portland will yet again be cut out of this. And I'm curious as sort of like what assurances we have that this is going to be drawn on the city limit or what that district is going to look like. And if there is any protection, because sure, in a perfect world, we draw it along the city boundary, and it, is representative for all taxpayers. But I'm just curious, does this bill have any protections against that?
Well, actually, what I would say is this is the protection against that. So right now, if you have a completely independent district, it could be drawn with any boundary. And what this says is if your district is your city, it could be governed by a city council. So if we were to move forward with a district using this particular governance option, I think that is your protection, that it would be the city, the city as a whole. And it's actually the existing options that maybe open the door to what you're concerned of more specific creations of new geographic areas that are exclusionary.
Sure, that's helpful. And just to clarify one more time, so this bill has to be drawn along the city limits of Portland. That would be the district, and that's the only geographic option.
Doesn't have to, it's just if we have 12 council members in the
Right.
future, which one of them is going to vote for the referral if their geographic area is not included in the district? So to Sarah's point, it's actually leaning the city into having a full city jurisdiction.
That makes sense.
Where an independent parks district could just do it for downtown, could just do it for certain areas of the system. If they, again, that all has to be passed by voters, has to be referred, just like all the steps. But that, you're more likely to end up with a full city jurisdiction with the local governance option.
Okay, that's helpful.
Mike and then Corbin.
Yeah, I want to take a stab at simplifying this and see if people can correct my view of this, which is that all of these conversations are important, but they're not part of what we're trying to approve at the moment. What we're really looking at is parks needs a long-term financing and governance structure that's going to help ensure the viability of parks in the long run. Through that process, we're going to have to be looking at a number of options. One of those options will likely be a parks district. All we're talking about with this is including the option, if as we evaluate this, that this is one possible governance option we could be looking at. We're not making any decisions on where lines are drawn, how things are funded, anything like that. All we're saying is this is one arrow we want to have in our quiver. We can still make all those decisions later on. That's correct, right? So I think all these conversations about compression and everything else, yes, they're important conversations to have, but they're not germane to what we're talking about right now, in my view.
Corbin and then Casey.
I'll go after Casey. I've talked enough, so.
Yeah, and I just, all I want to say is, I agree with everything that Mike says, and just so everybody knows, the reason why this is coming to us now is because of all the tasks that need to be done for any of the options that are possible to fund parks. This is the one that takes the longest because it requires revision to state law. And by and large, the legislators only meet every other year. So if we don't catch it this time, it's going to be 2 more years before you have this ability. So this is why it's coming up in an isolated basis, so far ahead of everything else.
Thank you, Casey. Corbin.
I was wondering if you can give some practical examples from, I guess, Seattle and Olympia of how it's benefited and what are maybe some of the growing pains?
Sure. I'm happy to follow up with some additional examples. They have some great reports that they've put out of kind of what they've been able to accomplish with the first terms of their levy, and they use it not just for operations, but also for capital. So they have great examples of sort of the outreach they've been able to do, the maintenance they've been able to increase, the new parks that they've been able to build. That in their instance, they don't use it for acquisition, but they use it for development on existing facilities. And just how it has supported them, especially through kind of the COVID years as well. So there's a lot of great information that they've put out there to really share how the district has supported their park system. Yeah, so I can follow up and send links to those reports if those are helpful, but yeah, they have also had sort of glowing audits of the process. In terms of growing pains, I think the way that they approached it really alleviated the growing pains, because instead of it was very smooth. Like there isn't any one person who actually works for the district, for example. So the district is a separate fund. It has sort of an oversight body and an oversight committee, but all of the employees that are providing the services or building the parks or maintaining the parks remained employees of Seattle Parks and Rec. They didn't try to sort of split off what the park system was doing versus the district system. So the services are still being provided for the city of Seattle, which I think, as I understand in my conversations with them, made it a very smooth process.
Thank you.
Chris?
I just wanted to build off of Mike's comment in terms of next actions as board members, noting that we can sign on as individuals or as a board, and knowing that the time limitations in session are coming up if this bill does not pass through, and knowing that this is an option in our quiver. If this bill does not pass this session, is it the plan to bring it back in short session next year? Is that the plan, and how will we move forward?
Well, we work through the Office of Government Relations. They get a legislative agenda passed by the city council. So that would be up to the city council, not like us as staff. We'll have a new city council in January 2025, and they'll set the legislative agenda next time, and this might or might not be a priority, so I don't know.
So I will say, I hear that there is some interest, and I will say that we can entertain a motion from the floor if somebody would like to make such a motion to support this bill. Casey, I see your hand is up.
I'd like to make a motion. And I may phrase it inappropriately. I was trying to write something down. I'd like to make motion for the board to support passage of the bill. I don't have the bill number in front of me, sir. You can fill it in. And to authorize the chair and vice chair of the board to take such action as reasonably required to support the bill getting passed.
So maybe can I wordsmith that a little bit? Maybe
of course.
To support the drafting of a letter in support of Bill 3515, that will provide an option of a city council governed special parks district. That's the motion.
Well, the only reason I wouldn't limit it to the letter is because we may have to testify. Someone may have to testify in support.
Yes.
And so I wouldn't want to leave it just at the letter.
How about to support?
Yeah.
Including a letter.
Sounds good.
Any second?
A second.
Chris, thank you. Any further discussion? If not, I'm going to call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Motion carries. Casey, you and I will draft something.
Okay, thank you.
Let me know if anybody wants to help us review it. Accessibility champions, Jonathan and Kenya.
Good evening, everyone. Since we're a little bit over time, I won't have a lengthy introduction. I just want to say that our disability analyst, Jonathan Simeone, is here, and I'll be driving the presentation. So I'll just turn it over to Jonathan to introduce himself. And we should, I think time-wise, we should have some time for some Q&A afterwards. And if not, just feel free to send either Jonathan and I any questions you may have about the Accessibility Champions program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kenya. Jonathan, I am going to interrupt you. I just wanted to warn you at 6:45 just to see if anyone has shown up to provide public comment. So apologies in advance for that interruption, but please go ahead.
I want to thank the Parks Board for having me. As Kenya said, my name is Jonathan Simeone. I'm the Disability Analyst in Portland Parks and Recreation. I'm the first Disability Analyst for the Bureau. I've been in the position since July. And by way of brief background, since most of you don't know me, I am a person with a disability. I was born blind. I am a resident of the city of Portland. So the work is not only professional, but it's a personal thing for me. The more accessible and inclusive of people with disabilities, Portland Parks and Recreation is, the more accessible to and inclusive of me, Portland Parks and Recreation is. My background is I'm a lawyer by trade. I'm a certified ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act coordinator. And so that's me in a nutshell. While we focus on the first slide, I want to give a few details that aren't in the presentation. One is the Accessibility Champions idea is not something new. Why it is new to Portland and the surrounding governmental bodies. There are all kinds of companies that have an Accessibility Champions program, Apple, Microsoft, Google, even in other countries like the BBC, the British Broadcasting Company has one. But what we are talking about here is a little different than what all of those other entities, to my knowledge, are doing. And I'll explain the reasons for that as we go along. So we can move to slide 2. Why Accessibility Champions? And I'm a pretty straightforward person. So the truth is we have decades of non-compliance. The Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990. And not to belabor the point, but there are several issues with PP&R's compliance around the transition plan, which is an assessment and a fixing of facilities to make them accessible, effective communication. Are we making our documents and web content accessible to people with disabilities? Are we putting on accessible outreach, public events? In all kinds of ways, we are not really in compliance. One of the issues that's related to that is a lack of staff with the skills to create better accessible content. As I said, I'm the first person to hold this position. So I'm the only person in the Bureau that actually has this kind of lived experience and combination of certified, demonstrated knowledge of what it means to be compliant and the community experience of being a person with a disability and living in the community. We also need to develop a Bureau-wide strategy for how are we going to achieve better compliance. And some of those things are things that we're working on and we will talk about deeper into the presentation. We can move to slide 3. So the desired outcomes, what do we want to do here? We want to train staff on becoming better at creating accessible content and doing all the kinds of things that would result in a more accessible, inclusive PP&R. We want to implement a more efficient and an equitable compliance strategy. So how are we going to reach community? We want to more effectively reach the disability community and serve the disability community. And of course, not to, but it's just the reality. The better we serve the disability community, the more we comply, the better legal protection we provide to the Bureau, because the better people are served, the less likely they are to sue. We can go to slide 4, acknowledging important truths. And this is just where we are. Accessibility champions will be new to most of the people who are assigned as champions. Few champions were directly hired to work on accessibility. And so what that means is this will be an add-on to people's responsibilities. So people will do this, they'll have to find time. It's not something that they were hired to do. It's not something they necessarily know how to do. There's going to be a learning curve. And then on top of that, there will be the time that has to be spent on actually performing the tasks of an accessibility champion. We can move to slide 5, supporting the champions. And these are things that the E&I team is looking at doing to make sure this program could work. So we're going to train people prior to giving them additional responsibilities. We're going to provide resources through a Microsoft team that will always be available, can provide training and places to ask questions. And the disability analyst, that's me, will hold regular office hours where people can ask questions and have individual training and get help with any issues that come up. We can move to slide 6, initial responsibilities. These things have been very carefully chosen because, quite honestly, they are low-hanging fruit, as it were. The Title II notice in facilities, the E&I team with the comms team and the safety team are already working on getting the notices into facilities. When that happens, the champion's responsibilities will be just to make sure that they're there, that they're still functioning, that people haven't knocked them down or damaged them in any way, anything like that. The online notice, again, the E&I team is working with comms to try and get this on critical web pages. We have a system in place where we're developing a civil rights page with this information that's been linked to some of the most visited PPNR websites. And over time, we can roll this out and add resources to the page. Meaningful access statements on public communications. What we're talking about here, and this is a city council has passed this through the Office of Equity and Human Rights, is getting it so that there is some notice of meaningful access on all public communication so that people are aware of their basic rights under Title II of the ADA and Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And that they have some idea of who to contact if they need an accommodation or have questions. Now we can move to the next slide. Additional responsibilities to be added over time. Addressing requests for accommodation. This is really going to be for a while the crux of what a lot of the champions will be doing. And that is when the public has a question, where do they go? If somebody needs a sign language interpreter, who in each program is going to answer that question and making sure they know how. And if something happens where a request has to be denied or modified, do people know how to do that? Investigating complaints. Right now, this is a little informal. We hope to have a complaint procedure developed in the near future and adopted by the Bureau. I've been working on that, but basically these champions would assist me. I would be the lead on it in my role, and they would help me interface with their teams and division to make sure we were getting that done. Effective communication. I hinted at this earlier. And what this means is, are we effectively communicating? It is a requirement of Title II. So is our web content accessible? Are our documents accessible? Are our email communications accessible? And then are our events accessible? Are we, for example, are we providing ASL at our public events? All of those things fall under this umbrella, and this would be working with individual teams and events to understand what's required here and how to do that. Now we can move to slide 8, the qualities of a champion. Well, obviously we want sincere interest in making programs more accessible to and inclusive of people with disabilities. A strong commitment to equity and accessibility. Knowledge of the program, team, and division. That's really important. You can't figure out where to go to make accommodations and who to talk to if you don't really know how your team is structured and you don't have the authority to do things when they need to be done. A desire to learn new things. Again, all of this work will be demonstrably new to most of the people doing it. So they're going to have an interest in learning something new and taking interest in something that is different. And again, not part of what they were hired specifically to do. And of course, being used to working with people from diverse backgrounds. In a situation where people with disabilities, there was a survey by Community and Civic Life a couple of years ago that said only 37% of respondents with disabilities said they had visited a park in the last year. That is because a lot of people, just being blunt, and as a member of community, talking to people, they don't feel welcome, they don't feel included. And in some cases, the facilities and communications aren't accessible and don't actually include them. They literally cannot participate. And so those are things we have to really work on. Microsoft Office skills. Obviously, if you're part of a team that produces a lot of content, having the ability to explain to people how to do things in Microsoft Office is going to matter. And I should say, to this end, we have started a series in partnership with the Office of Equity and Human Rights on creating accessible digital content. We had our first of 4 trainings yesterday, and we'll be doing 1 a week over the next 3 weeks. And those will be are being recorded and will be archived and made available to anyone on the staff who can't attend. Initial composition of the team. That's the next slide. Now,
I'm going to interrupt you. Sorry, Jonathan. As I so appreciate your presentation, but one of the things that is important to the board is we do have a point at our agenda at 6:45 to make sure that there's nobody who showed up for public comment, and I wanted to make sure that nobody had. I don't believe anyone has, but if there is, please speak up. And if not, please, Jonathan, continue. Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
No problem. I want to be clear in saying that the Accessibility Champions is not yet a program. In my view, it's still a concept. We are still forming this. We are still discussing how it would work, what exactly it will do. And this is part of it that's still being discussed. How is this going to work? What is the composition going to be? Right now, we have someone from the director's office, at least 3 representatives from each of the divisions, and then program-specific representation based on delivery of service and program requirements. And all of that is to say, we need to have a system that has redundancy built into the program. In divisions of hundreds of people, we can't really have one person when it's, in my view, when it's an add-on to their responsibility and they're learning how to do it. We can't have one person responsible for all of that. That's especially true what happens when people are on vacation. And the more resources we commit to this, the better we can do. So if we have one person maybe, or a whole total champions team of 4 or 5 people, then we're going to wind up struggling to approach the bare minimum and maybe not getting there. But if we have a more robust group of people, maybe we can accomplish a lot of the bare minimum things, basic legal compliance, but maybe we can go beyond that. Maybe we can start looking at meaningful outreach to the community. We can do community outreach events for the disability community, explaining parks programs, explaining how people can interface with them. And truthfully, right now, we are prevented from doing those things, because if we had an influx of requests, we wouldn't have the capacity to deal with those. We wouldn't have people in place in different positions to address those. We have to have a system where there's more than just one person who is working on how this stuff should be done on a daily basis and looking at the system-wide effects of that. And that's why, my view is we need to come up with some kind of a of a representation on the champions that is a little bit more robust, so we can focus on more than just the basic, trying to get the basic level of compliance. We can move to slide 10, looking ahead. As I said earlier, this is not normally what accessibility champions programs do. Normally, they are groups of people in the organization who want to learn more about accessibility and how to embed it into their work, concepts like universal design and that kind of thing. And they are very large groups. In this case, I don't know that that would make the most sense, because we're trying to figure out how to do basic levels of compliance at this stage and try to build up a system. But what, just speaking for myself, what I would like to see over time is that we create a structure in the Bureau that works on meaningfully incorporating accessibility throughout the Bureau. So hiring additional people with the qualifications to do the work and classifying them so they can do the work, and strategically putting them throughout the Bureau in places where they can be the most effective. And that, of course, empowering them to make the change. When there are a lot of systemic issues that need work, people need to have the ability to go do that work. And having divisions allocate specific budget to accessibility and inclusivity of people with disabilities. This is a must. We can't achieve widespread accommodation requests. We can't do outreach. We're very limited as to how much we can involve people with disabilities without the resources, both personal and monetary, to meet the demand. If all of a sudden a lot of people with disabilities started accessing facilities and then asking for accommodations, we would have a very hard time. But if we did some of these things, then we could turn the Accessibility Champions program into what a traditional Accessibility Champions program is. And we could have much larger meetings, probably not as frequent, but focused on accessible documents, focused on planning accessible events, focused on, disability etiquette and things that a lot of people need, but are not necessarily what people who are granting accommodations requests. I mean, hopefully if someone's doing that, they really have those basic knowledge pieces already. And so that's what we want to achieve, is getting accessibility into the work in a way ultimately, and it's a longer term goal, but where we are proactive and really dedicating the personal resources, the staffing resources, and the budget resources to catch up on where the ADA expected us to be decades ago. And with that, I will stop. I hope that made sense, given the time rush. And in case there was public comment, I went through that a little bit faster than I did when we did it for SMT. So I can take any questions now. And if anyone has any questions after the meeting, my email is jonathan.simeone@portland.oregon.gov. And my phone number is 971-279-9260.
Thank you so much for the presentation, Jonathan. Allie.
Yeah, hey, Jonathan, it's Allie Berman. Thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you so much for doing this work. I know as the first, accessibility analyst, there's a lot of work, and I love that this is going to branch out and give, more tendrils to that. So I'm really excited by the program. Obviously, it's going to be in its infancy and it's got to grow. But I just wanted to give you first a kudos. And then I wanted to ask two questions. One is, how are you going to find the champions? Will they apply, or will managers sort of nominate people on their team to be that, since it will be additional work? And two, will they be in essence, a kind of cohort, learning together, being able to rely on each other, ask questions to each other as they're going through this learning process, as well as you.
So I want to take the second point first because it's the easier one. In the beginning, I imagine we'll have a training session on a monthly basis. And in that session, I will be training people about the real roles and responsibilities and why we're doing things, but also answering questions and hopefully fostering a community among the champions. As I said, we're going to have a team in Microsoft Teams with all kinds of resources. Obviously, there'll be chat functions where people can engage with each other outside of meetings. And I'm going to hold office hours so that if individuals have questions or a group of champions have questions, they can come to those. And then obviously, I'm just generally available on my work schedule. And people who know me know that sometimes my work schedule is 2 o'clock in the morning. So you never know when I will show up in your inbox with a thought or a question. So that's, and you know, if someone happens to be of that ilk, we could have a dialogue at 2:30 in the morning about something that happened. So to the first part of your question, as I said, this is still being discussed. We're still trying to figure out how all this would work. We may get to a point where we do a presentation or multiple presentations about this for Bureau staff just to gauge interest. Who would like to participate? My view is if someone's interested in it and they volunteer, it may be a little easier, especially since it's an add-on to people's work. But that's a decision that's being hashed out now as to how people and how many people from each division. All of that is still being developed, which is why I say, in my view, this is still a concept. It's not an active program until we hammer out those details and we actually have a plan to get meeting and start doing the work. And I'm sorry, I can't give a more detailed answer than that, but I don't want to get out over my skis here.
No, thank you. Appreciate that, Jonathan.
Let's hold on the can of worms.
Thank you. Any other questions? Jonathan, thank you so much for doing this work. It's super important. And I know there are a lot of, you know, ADA quote unquote violations, some of which are, you know, small and some of which are large. And I really look forward to, you know, moving the Bureau and our entire park system to one that is much more accessible. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me, everybody. And again, if I can do anything to answer any other questions, don't hesitate to let me know. Thank you.
With that, we have come to the end of our agenda. Are there any other comments or new business that you want to bring up before we adjourn?
I want to bring up something.
Go ahead, Corbin.
I want us to seriously consider an environmental justice working group.
Thank you. We will consider that with the next, as we work through the working group structure. You know, at this point, I think there are a few potential working groups being considered. And as we know, we only have so many board members, but let's definitely consider that among the, this would probably be with the Board Affairs Working Group is probably the way to do that.
Yep.
Anything else for the good of the order before we adjourn? If not, we will adjourn. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions, your attention.
Ciao.
Well done, 6:59. I was getting a little nervous there.
Well, hey, last month we ended like